Hey everybody, I'm Professor Harsin from the Global Communication Department, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about fake news and the coronavirus. Right? You probably heard the World Health Organization says that we're not just faced with the pandemic of the coronavirus, but we're also faced with or threatened by a corresponding or accompanying infodemic, right? A kind of disease of information or false information, right? So you've heard about fake news. What is fake news? Well, fake is counterfeit or something pretending to be what it's not, right? Like counterfeit money or fool's gold, etc. And news is from the Latin root nova, new things, right? Reporting about recent occurrences that we didn't know about before, and those of supposedly great import to more than just one or two people. That doesn't sound like anything new. What is new about fake news, right, and why it has been coined in recent years, is that it corresponds to this historical period very recently where people finally, lots of people, billions of people have the potential actually to mass communicate. That is to say, it used to be reserved for governments, right, militaries, people with lots of a monopoly on equipment to broadcast and so forth, right, states and corporations and et cetera, et cetera. That is no longer the case now with all sorts of applications that we have, right? Like the one that I'm using right now, QuickTime. Okay, so within these conditions, millions or billions of people potentially can produce content, including news, amateur news, or they can circulate it, right? Distribute it, and so forth, and very quickly. And so there are lots of things crisscrossing and swirling about all the time, and it's not necessarily the same thing for different people, and it's very difficult to monitor sometimes, or certainly to control, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing, of course, when you're thinking about free speech. But for the coronavirus, of course, there have been some reported problems recently. And these aren't necessarily very different, some scholars will tell you, than those that we've seen with other pandemics in the past. In fact, dating back at least to the 14th century with the Black Plague, where anti-Semitic rumors about the origins accompanied it. More recently, with the jumping to the 20th century, you have the AIDS virus and some popular rumors or conspiracy theories that accompany that were that the CIA invented it. More recently, even still, with the Ebola crisis, there was fake news that was circulating in Africa, especially that claimed that it was the U.S. military that had designed the Ebola crisis to depopulate the planet and especially Africa. So, with COVID-19, it's probably not all that surprising then that we would have similar kinds of conspiracy theories and rumors, and now what's called fake news circulating about it. These things happen in crises where there is more uncertainty and a dearth or lack of information about things, certain information. So even though a majority of scientists are reported as saying that they think that the origins of the virus were that it was transferred from animals to humans, they can't say with absolute certainty that that is the case. That leaves the opening, of course, for people to say, like, for example, President Trump in the United States, that it could be this Chinese government lab in Wuhan, right? Or, on the other hand, that the Chinese could say that it's the American military. Or in India, that you could say that it's a Muslim virus, right? Or that it was the pharmaceutical industry that's behind it, or that 5G towers in the UK are amplifying it and it's exacerbating it. So who is or what is responsible for fake news and other unreliable information? Well, innocent people, as you can probably gather from what I was just saying, who want answers. People like you and me a lot of the time. People who are not scientific experts about the coronavirus, right? Nor are we journalists who are directly interviewing people being affected by it or experts about it. However, one thing that's more specific to this right now is the way that state actors, but especially openly, politicians, are weaponizing it, and then others are monetizing it, making money off the fear and the anxiety for their own particular ends, right? The covert state-based projects like Russian propaganda that we've heard about in the last few years that's been documented by big data projects like the Oxford Institute on computational propaganda, they found that the Russian government, of course, has been very active in trying to destabilize Western societies with all sorts of fake news. But when you've got someone like President Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil spreading some of these suspicions, that is taken to a new level. Or when, say, the President Modi in India and other politicians there are claiming that it is Corona jihad. This is a particular weaponization right now, and it corresponds to a context of extreme distrust about news organizations out there, and about government, and about social information on social media. All of these things coming together create a very volatile kind of epistemological, fancy word for knowledge, right? Public atmosphere there. So again, that leaves the opening for lots of things to circulate and be questioned. There are a couple of points that I want to consider here in conclusion that I would actually like to debunk. One is that this is really a historic distrust of science that's erupting and causing these kinds of problems with fake news. In fact, that's not the case. What you're finding is in a lot of the fake news that the fake news claims are being buttressed with claims by supposedly from virologists, Nobel Prize-winning virologists even. Now, the problem is that what they say these virologists are saying in the fake news is not true. They never said it in many of these cases, right? Or if there is a scientist that is quoted, this person is actually a scientist, but not an expert on coronavirus or not a virologist. And what they are saying is at odds with the greater scientific community. Okay, there's that. And then, in fact, surveys suggest that that people in places like the United States and France actually trust scientists much more than they trust people like journalists or teachers or even doctors. Right? And that's been fairly stable for many decades now, according to these kinds of survey companies like Gallup or Harris Polls or World Social Values surveys. All right. So if it's not distrust in science itself, what we do have to understand is that science is mediated when it comes to us, right? It's journalists that are covering it, and journalism is distrusted mainstream, it is. But nor is it that this theory that people are going to alternative news, crazy sites like the Russian Sputnik site, which is full of fake news and propaganda. It's really under, at best, 7% of populations in countries like France or the US that goes actively to these kinds of sites to get its news regularly. So, and nor is it even belief in the fake news, right? There we find, at best, with some of the fake news, maybe a quarter of a population, for example, in France, the first week of April, believing, it said, reported as believing that in the Wuhan lab origin story, right? But the great majority of the people don't even believe these things. However, a much bigger percentage of people, up to 50%, sometimes more in these populations, are not sure about the fake news claims. And so they circulate it, and it gets more and more attention. And people spend time debunking it, all sorts of labor, time. And so the effect, the big effect is on confusion and distraction in public life, in mediated public life, right? And that is true certainly of the coronavirus, which has had all sorts of effects and spikes in anti-Asian hate crime in the US, to anti-Semitic crimes in Germany, and to attacks on Muslims in India. In conclusion, there's some good news about corona coverage. Despite the fake news circulating very broadly, in countries like the United States and France, two examples again, trust has actually increased in journalism. 80% of Americans say they trust journalists' coverage of the coronavirus. In France, 52% trust major news organizations. That's up 50%. So that's the good news. Okay, I enjoyed speaking with you. I hope you found this enjoying or entertaining. And I hope you're staying healthy, and good luck getting through the infodemic.